may sign a peace treaty with North Korea as the two Koreas hold working-level talks today to finalize arrangements for the April 27th summit. Now, this announcement by the Blue House on a possible peace treaty follows U.S. President Donald Trump's comments on how the two Koreas are discussing formally ending the Korean War. And before I sit down with an expert to talk more about this, we first head over to the News Center, where our Devin Whiting has the latest headlines at this hour. Hello, Devin.
Hi, Ju, and that's right. A peace treaty could finally be in the cards for the two Koreas. The South Korean presidential office said as much today in a press briefing. Our Cha Sang-mi was at that briefing and joins us live from the Blue House. So, Sang-mi, what more have we learned about the summit coming up now in just 9 days?
Yes, Devin, at the upcoming summit, the presidential office of Cheong Wa Dae is looking for a way to achieve a peace treaty between the two Koreas. As you know, hostilities in the Korean War ended not with a formal peace, but with an armistice, which means South Korea and North Korea are technically still at war. A high-level official said in the briefing today that the South Korean government is looking into that possibility. The official hinted that what could happen is an agreement is reached between the two Koreas at their summit, then a formal end to the Korean War is declared at the summit between North Korea and the U.S. But the official underscored that this would need to be discussed thoroughly by the parties directly involved. This announcement comes in response to comments made by President Trump during his 2 days of talks with Japanese Prime Minister Abe, in which he said that the two Koreas are discussing an end to the war.
Well, that would obviously be a huge result. So as the day draws near, we can see the picture getting a lot clearer, and it seems like Cheong Wa Dae is coming up with a detailed blueprint. Sang-mi, what about the summit's main agenda, which is denuclearization? How does the South Korean government see that panning out?
Right, Devin. The chief of the National Security Office, Chung Yong, announced today that Seoul and Washington are considering ways to reward Pyongyang should it really decide to denuclearize. One of which is removing that what North Korea says are its own concerns about its security. Chung was asked whether the meaning of denuclearization might differ in Seoul, Washington, and Pyongyang, but he said that he doesn't see that as the case. He added that while there might be differences in terms of the detailed process to achieve denuclearization, in the big picture, the South Korean, North Korean, and U.S. governments do not see denuclearization differently to any great extent. And so he said a nuclear-free peninsula is not an unreachable goal. Back to you, Devin.
All right, thanks for that, Sang-mi. Our Cha Sang-mi at the Blue House. Meanwhile, preparations for the U.S. and North Korea summit are also quickly picking up steam. President Trump made several comments on the issue Tuesday, but the White House had to clarify that he did not mean to indicate that he had already spoken directly with Kim Jong-un. Lee Ji-won has more.
Tuesday's headlines were filled with claims that U.S. President Trump had direct talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The news came after Trump smiled and answered yes when asked by a reporter if he had spoken directly with Kim. Trump was asked a question during the first day of two-day summit with the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe at President Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. While that would have been a major development if it were true, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders soon clarified that the talks were not with Kim directly. What has been confirmed is that the U.S. did engage in direct talks with the North at extremely high levels, according to President Trump, but he did not specify which senior officials from Washington and Pyongyang have talked. The U.S. leader also said that he believes there is a lot of goodwill and that good things are happening, but stressed that Washington will see what happens, as it is ultimately the end result that is important rather than the fact that they are working on having a meeting. Just hours after Trump's comments, there was a report that CIA Director Mike Pompeo visited Pyongyang. Citing two people with direct knowledge of the trip, the Washington Post said the CIA chief went to Pyongyang over the Easter weekend to meet Kim Jong-un as Trump's envoy in an effort to lay the groundwork for the much-anticipated North Korea-U.S. summit. The Easter weekend was from March 31st to April 1st, not long after Pompeo had been nominated for Secretary of State. This would make Pompeo one of the most senior officials known to have visited Pyongyang in recent years, following the nation's intelligence chief James Clapper in 2014. But the CIA and the White House declined to comment on the matter. The intelligence agency has been in direct contact with the North in recent weeks. Multiple sources, including CNN and Reuters, reported that CIA and State Department officials are communicating with the North through back channels to plan for the summit, which is expected to be held in late May or early June. 이지원, Arirang News.
And now more on President Trump's meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister. The fear in Tokyo has been that Japan is being sidelined on North Korea issues, a major reason why Abe went all the way to Florida for the second time. Between that and issues of trade, the two leaders have a lot to discuss. Kim Hyo-sun tells us more.
North Korea is definitely a major agenda for President Trump and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. President Trump said Seoul and Pyongyang are discussing to formally end the decades-long Korean War, adding that such conversations have his blessing. As Trump prepares for his summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, he also told Abe that North Korea is coming along and that the meeting will take place probably in early June or a little before that.
We will probably be, depending on the various meetings and conversations, we'll be having meetings with Kim Jong-un very soon. That'll be taking place probably in early June or a little before that. Assuming things go well. It's possible things won't go well and we won't have the meetings, and we'll just continue to go along this very strong path that we've taken. But we will see what happens.
President Trump also explained that 5 locations are under consideration for the scheduled Washington-Pyongyang summit. Trade is also a massive topic between the two leaders, with Tokyo being one of the few American allies that has not been exempted from President Trump's new steel and aluminum tariffs. The White House added earlier that Trump and Abe will explore ways to expand fair and reciprocal trade and investment ties between the two allies, which are also two of the world's wealthiest and most innovative economies. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
In other news, the International Monetary Fund has released its latest estimate for South Korea's economic growth this year, and it's in line with that of Korea's central bank, growth of 3%. The consensus seems to be building that Korea will weather the emerging trade tensions between China and the U.S. Lee Seung-jae has this report.
The International Monetary Fund is forecasting that the global economy will continue to strengthen despite an overall decline in global stock markets and the simmering trade tensions between the U.S. and China. The IMF also says it's maintaining its 3% growth forecast for South Korea this year. This matches the 3% growth forecast by the Bank of Korea last week, despite mixed signs facing the export-driven economy. In addition, the IMF's World Economic Outlook forecasts 2.9% growth for 2019 and a slight downward trend of 0.1% each year for the next few years. This comes as the nation's economy grew 3.1% last year, accelerating from the previous year's 2.8% growth on the back of robust exports and a recovery in private spending. Meanwhile, the global economy as a whole is expected to expand 3.9% in 2018, unchanged from its earlier forecast, with the IMF also predicting the same level of growth for the following year. The growth forecast is the fastest pace since 2011, with every major economy expected to grow for a second year in a row, supported by strong momentum, favorable market sentiment, accommodative financial conditions, and the domestic and international repercussions of expansionary fiscal policy in the U.S. Despite the rosy outlook, the IMF warned that rising U.S.-China trade tensions threatened to damage the steady global growth picture, but added there was still time for the world's two largest economies to step back from the brink. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The chairman of South Korean steelmaker POSCO has resigned after a term said to have been free of scandal. Speaking to reporters after a board meeting on Wednesday morning, Kwon Oh-jun said the company should be led by a new chief younger than him who is competent and energetic. The board approved his resignation, and his successor is likely to be appointed within the next 2 or 3 months. Kwon was appointed head of POSCO in March 2014, and his term had been extended to March 2020. Kwon is credited with helping the company recover from a management crisis it was going through when he took the helm. Investors seem to have taken the news in stride. Shares of POSCO jumped today by nearly 5%. I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
So we're just several days away from seeing the leaders of South and North Korea meet for a historic summit, which would be the first time in more than a decade. And today, officials from the two sides met to discuss various issues regarding the summit. A working level meeting took place for over 5 hours, starting at 10 a.m. Korea time at the Tongil-gak, a North Korean building that straddles the inter-Korean border, to discuss issues of security, protocol, and media coverage. Now, although details of today's talks are not officially out yet, we're likely to learn more about the time of the summit, as well as the formality of the talks on April 27th. Aside from today's meeting, South Korea's presidential office also said the hotline between the leaders of the two Koreas will be set up by the end of this week. And to tell us more about all this, Professor Cho Jung-hoon from Aju University joins us in the studio today. Welcome to the program.
Great to be here.
All right, so with the big day for the two Koreas fast approaching, South and North Korea held working level talks today at the Tongil-gak. Now, although the details are not out yet because they just wrapped it up, what can we expect from this meeting today?
And as we heard from the news, I think the preparation is in full swing. And two parties are working hard to make sure that this event ends with certain degree of success. At the moment, there's no signs of any concerns. Protocols, news media, and they also try to introduce elements of surprise in a positive way so that this big event receive good media exposure as well as good meaningful outcome. So far so good, I might say. Yeah.
All right, and another big news that we heard today is about two Koreas perhaps discussing to establish a peace treaty. So what are we expecting on this front?
That is significant. That is truly significant. If you go back our clock to 1953, South Korea refused to sign a peace treaty for many, many reasons, political and geopolitical reasons. There are 3 steps that can resolve the tension or war of two parties. We start with truce, meaning that we stop shooting each other. Then it's followed by armistice, that we agree not to engage fighting for an extended period of time. So far, that has been done. What has not been done to formally ending this conflict is the peace treaty. So legally speaking and technically speaking, South and North Korea are not still in the war stage, and we don't need any indication of re-engagement to initiate our hostile actions. But once we sign a peace treaty, it's a whole new game. So we need to inform each other if we want to re-engage our hostile activity. But it's not as simple as that, like signing a peace treaty. Remember, we have not been a party of armistice treaty. It was signed by United Nations, China, and North Korea. So there seems to be different versions of who should be the stakeholder or party to sign the peace treaty. Of course, South Korea wants to be the main party of the peace treaty, and I don't know whether North Korea has the same opinion. Whether there will be one comprehensive peace treaty with multilateral stakeholders, South, North, US, China, and others, or there will be a series of bilateral peace treaty. For example, South and North, one, and North Korea and US, the other one, and possibly with Japan as well, because Japan also didn't sign any peace treaty with North Korea. So there's many variations of peace treaty, and it has its own significance on how peace treaty is prepared and signed.
And also, U.S. President Donald Trump said that the U.S. has started talking with North Korea, quote unquote, directly. And we heard in the reports previously that CIA Director Mike Pompeo flew to Pyongyang a few weeks ago. So what kind of significance do all these latest developments involving the U.S. and North Korea carry?
Indeed, there are two important significances here. First, as news says, Mr. Pompeo has been one of the highest ranks, U.S. ranks, who visited North Korea recently. That means there has been a serious discussion on terms and conditions of the potential summit between North Korea and US.
Okay.
But more interestingly, if I may, the fact that they make it public that there has been such visit indicates that a certain degree of meaningful progress is underway. Otherwise, they will not release this visit. If you see international diplomacy, releasing those visits or as part of the prep indicates that something is going well.
Okay.
So Trump otherwise would have made it known.
Right.
For such a failed visit. So it's a good sign.
Another good news. Now, we have that high-level inter-Korean talks coming up on Friday this week, during which the two sides are obviously expected to discuss the agenda of April 27th summit. So where do the countries stand, or where do the two Koreas stand in regards to the denuclearization issue?
The issue of denuclearization will be right and center of this party, of the summit rather, and will be a right and center issue for North Korea and US. In principle, North Korea is likely to accept that Korean Peninsula better be a place without nuclear weapons. But it's a matter of process, and it's a matter of proportionality of the reward. And when and how North Korea will receive a reward if North Korea initiate and complete the process of denuclearization. I'm not sure whether there has been any meaningful consensus on the latter part of the progress, but in principle, it's likely that both parties will agree that Korean Peninsula will be or may be denuclearized in the future.
So what are some of the possible, I guess, rewards that could be given to North Korea for denuclearization?
In large part, there could be two elements of reward. First, of course, is the security of the regime, which may be covered by the discussion of peace treaty.
Okay.
Peace treaty means that we do not consider North Korea anymore enemy. Likewise, US will not treat North Korea as an enemy. So that means there will be a normalization of diplomacy, there will be embassy, and there will be exchange of people, all the rest of it follows. So that gives certain degree of security. The second, of course, what North Korea needs most is economic support.
Right.
And that is a lot more tricky because we had not so successful experience in the past.
Right.
So reward first and then action later. That probably the preferred mode of operation from North Korea may not be accepted by South Korea as well as US.
Right. So we'll have to be kind of careful with that.
Indeed.
Now, if North Korea does agree to this complete, irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, what are the chances that we might see these inter-Korean summits become regular?
I think South Korea, to say the least, has a very serious and good intention to regularize this summit. And it's a good thing. My personal experience of working on these negotiations in other setting is one of the difficult line to agree during the negotiation is we agree to meet again. So that final line is very, very tough. They don't agree to meet again unless there's certain progress.
Right.
So regularizing the summit after so many years of suspension,
right.
Signifies that both sides have a good intention to achieve something. So my personal assessment is if they agree, if North Korea agrees, irreversible and comprehensive denuclearization, South Korea may well agree to make this inter-Korean summit regular.
So, I mean, what progress then might we see in regards to the reunions of separated families from the Korean War?
This is one of the likely and acceptable cards of engagement from South Korean society as well as international community. So, and it's not so complicated issue either.
Compared to denuclearization, right?
Indeed,
yes.
even with the presence of all kinds of sanctions, because it's a humanitarian issues. So it does not violate any of the sanctions that international community as well as US has imposed at the moment.
So then what are the chances that we might see the two sides discuss bilateral economic cooperation?
At the moment, close to zero.
Okay.
Both sides wanted to, I'm pretty sure. but they all know that opening the champagne too early has its own negative impact. So having a certain degree of patience might be a discussion underwater, but they will not, my prediction, if I may, is they will not formalize the discussion of economic support at this summit. As you mentioned, the regularizing the summit, second one, third one, the economic bilateral cooperation will be probably the primary subject, but not at this time.
All right. What about North Korea's human rights issue? You did mention about the family reunions, but other human rights issues that involve North Korea.
This is another thorny stone.
Right.
I'm not sure whether South Korean government has planned to or intend to, but my personal opinion is they should. If we don't discuss North Korean human rights issue, others will. Likely, U.S. will raise this issue, and it will make the bilateral cooperation even more challenging. So it's better for us to initiate the discussion of human rights. We will not ask to resolve all kinds of human rights issues North Korea has at the moment overnight. But we need to set our record clear that human rights issue is one of our agenda, and also we provide reasonable and sensible pathway to resolve it that North Korea can accept. And also persuade North Korea that the terms and conditions that we offer is a lot more amendable, if I may, than that from other international community.
And human rights issues involving North Korea is very much important to, like you said, the U.S. and as well as Japan too, right?
It is indeed. And there's no point to put a blind eye on human rights issues, because others will raise. And if that is the case, then South Korea will be in a lot more difficult position to balance between human rights violation of North Korea with the economic cooperation. In international community, economic cooperation and human rights has to go hands in hand.
All right, so talking about Japan, we know Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is in the U.S. to meet with President Trump to talk about issues regarding bilateral trade as well as North Korea, obviously. So what probably came out of that meeting?
I think in terms of significance of that summit, the fact that they have discussed North Korea and they have made a press release together is a lot more important than the content itself. What Japan wanted to make sure is to have a good seat on the table.
Right.
And U.S. basically nod to that request. You will have a seat on the table. And of course, there will be a good line of communication between two countries. And of course, South Korea will also cooperate closely with U.S. as well as Japan. So that line of partnership, once again, has been reconfirmed.
It's kind of, that line of alliance is kind of in contrast to North Korea's alliance with China and Russia too, it seems.
Indeed. However, that kind of a dichotomy of two alliances conflicting each other may not be so healthy to resolve this tension. So for South Korea, we try to have a more arrows hitting each other instead of formalizing one party from other.
All right, and we also have the hotline between the leaders of the two Koreas to be set up this week. So, I mean, it is significant that the two leaders will be able to talk to each other directly, but what other significance does this event carry?
It is indeed somehow, it's a welcoming news, but I welcome this with sense of sadness, because having a hotline, even with opponent, opposing or hostile nation, is normal practice in international community.
Right.
The fact that we have stopped this hotline for many years shows that how serious the situation has been. So I'm glad that we're back to normal. And to explain a little bit more the importance of this hotline, it actually significantly reduced the chance of unintended conflict that might arise from unexpected events, because that resolves the possibility of misinterpretation of others' action. And especially if this outline is at the level of President and Kim Jong-un of North Korea, is even better.
All right.
So I hope that they will pick up the phone more often than not.
Yeah, we hope so too. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that brings us to the end of our program, but make sure to tune in to Arirang News for more domestic and global news updates throughout the day. Thanks for watching and goodbye.
The spring fete on the Korean Peninsula is approaching.
4월에 있을 남북 정상회담을 통해서 좀 더 남과 북이